This is OZ Sherpa, and we're highlighting today an article that's in Tax Notes, and it's called "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Distressed QOZ Businesses." Kind of cool that that OZs are back in the press. It'll be interesting to see what this article ultimately ends up saying. This was actually put out by one of the big four, by KPMG, and effectively, he talks about, like how OZs, once again, right? So he goes through the basics, talks about eligible entities, talks about the rigmarole. And it's interesting is that, this walks and talks very much like a law review article that we would have put together when I was in law school. And so he highlights, for even the best prepared QOZ businesses, the cost increases over the last 3 years can hinder a QOZ business's ability to deploy its working capital. At a certain point, those delays can threaten a QOZ business's compliance with the working capital safe harbor. We've talked about that a lot inside of our mastermind that meets every Tuesday. And we've talked about, okay, how can you deal with that? And if we make changes to that or we refund the money, is that still qualify as substantially consistent with the written plan and schedule, right? But what is that point? And so then it says, at the outset, the answer depends on how much specificity, say that 3 times fast, is required for a plan and schedule. There's no guidance on how specific a written plan must be. So one of the things that we recommend is actually making it pretty basic so that way that you're not tripped up by specific stuff. And it's interesting that, once again, this is not filed with the IRS. It's just something that you keep on, on hand. So if that QOZ business finds that despite having a well-crafted working capital plan, delays in deploying its working capital risk a substantially consistent violation, the code provides 2 temporary relief mechanisms. First, if it's located within a federally declared disaster area, you get that extension. Second is that if there's been governmental delays, then you get to delay the 31 months in accordance with how long that's happened. We've done that a couple of times for folks, right? Where it should have taken 12 months and it took 24 for them to get permits. And so we have their engineer put together a letter. We attach that to the working capital safe harbor plan, and that's how we get to our compliance with it. And then they actually point out, right? So if no relief mechanisms are available and a QOZ business fails one of its requirements, and you actually get a gimme, so you actually get a 1 6-month test that you can fail. But if it fails a second time, then, and this is key, is that it's going to violate the 90% investment standard. But it says all is not lost. QOFs are entitled to a 6-month cure period, right? And then you can also look at potentially liquidating the business. So the bad, if a QOZ business is unable to weather the hypothetical cost increases discussed above, it may find itself in a more serious situation than a mere delay to its working capital schedule. QOZ business in financial distress may have to consider restructuring its debt or selling assets to another QOZ business, each of which implicates unique potential tax compliance issues. Now, it's interesting because one of the deals that we have inside of our mastermind, so we've got an actual app that you can log into, and inside of that community, there is a space where people can post deals. In one of our deals, it is exactly this. They are raising a fund to specifically either recapitalize or merge failed QOZ businesses into their fund, or to invest into those QOZBs. And this is specifically the case when you can take out debt. So, this Tufts analysis. So one of the things that we're going to do is to jump into that. And I would recommend that you guys take a look at and do a deep dive into this article. Man, this thing gets kind of sticky. And I think that I am going to skip over this. Now let's talk about the ugly. Sometimes, despite the best commercial efforts and creative management strategies, a QOZ business may simply reach a stage in which things get ugly, and terminating a project may seem at first glance the most suitable path forward. The problem with that is that you then, right? So you have all kinds of issues associated with your 90% test and whether it's now going to trigger penalties. And so it does say, and this is actually part of the maybe the most interesting piece of this article, with QOZ 2.0 on the horizon, it's important to note that gain arising from the occurrence of an inclusion event is generally regarded as an eligible gain for purposes of making a qualified investment in a QOF and a deferral election under Section 1400 Z2A. And he cites the regulation section 1.1 over. However, gain from the disposition of a QOF interest to a person related to the investor within the meaning of Section 1400Z is not eligible gain. Now, so this is where it gets really tricky. So if you're selling your interest to a related person, then I don't think that that works. But I do think that an inclusion event does. So now that's a really interesting play, right? And this is the thing that we're really trying to dive into to see if you're a captive opportunity fund, is an inclusion event a sufficient mechanism to roll over into 2.0. This is one of the things that we are actively running to ground. I wanted to point this out in this article. For eligible investors, this may provide a second chance to obtain QOZ Opportunity Zone tax benefits and reinvest the eligible gain from the inclusion event into a suitable new QOF, unless the decertified QOF had no liquidity. Now, so that's the biggest issue, is that you got to actually have cash. In that case, investors would need to draw from other reserves to make a qualified investment in a new QOF. Once OZ 2.0 comes in line, investors in a decertified QOF may experiencing a QOF glow up if they can reinvest in a QOF in a manner that will convey tax benefits under OZ 2.0. Now, this is the big $1 million question right here. This section. Gain from the disposition of a QOF interest to a person related to the investor within the meaning of 1400Z2E2 is not eligible gain. So this goes into our bigger question about whether a captive QOF inclusion event constitutes disposition to a related person. So we're running that one to ground. Stay tuned. We'll have an update on that here shortly.